What did it say about her, Ginevra thought, that she was seriously considering selling herself to a sexy mafia boss to make her problems disappear? The thought made her stomach twist so violently she thought she might actually throw up. She sat cross-legged on the lounge room floor, her phone clutched so tightly in her hands her fingers had gone numb. The screen glowed against the dark apartment, illuminating the photographs she kept forcing herself to look at, even though every glance carved another wound into her chest. Bruises, zip ties, a terrified pair of familiar eyes swollen from crying. Every few minutes she zoomed in like she might discover some hidden clue everyone else had missed. A location, a reflection, anything. But there was nothing except concrete walls, bad lighting, and enough fear in the images to make her lungs lock up. Across from her, Mia sat curled into the armchair with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the warm weather. Neither of them had moved much in hours. Empty coffee cups littered the table beside half-eaten crackers neither of them remembered opening. 5 hours. 5 hours of spiraling panic. Impossible theories, dead-end ideas, frantic Google searches, and whispered arguments that kept collapsing into silence. And still they had nothing. Her instructions were painfully clear. Go to the Amara Boutique Lounge at 9. Look for an Italian man in his mid-30s, tattoos, black suit, no name, no warning, no explanation, just an address and a threat. Mia dragged a shaky hand through her hair. She looked pale enough to faint. "Ginny, you're trapped between two evils here." Her voice cracked. "No one survives this kind of thing. What are you going to do?" A tear slid silently down Ginevra's cheek before dropping onto her phone screen. She wiped it away furiously. "I don't have a choice," she whispered. "If I don't go, she dies." Mia looked away immediately, guilt flashing over her face because they both knew the truth. She was dead the moment they took her. The words punched straight through her chest. For a second, Ginevra couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred. Her pulse started hammering wildly beneath her skin, too fast, too hard. She pressed a hand against her sternum as if she could physically hold herself together. "No." The word came out broken. "No, don't say that." But Mia's silence was answer enough. Ginevra knew it too. Kidnappings like this didn't end with happy reunions and hugs at the airport. This wasn't a movie. People like this didn't leave loose ends alive. Still there was time. There had to be. Hope was ugly sometimes, desperate, delusional, but she clung to it anyway because the alternative would destroy her. "Perhaps," she swallowed hard, "perhaps I can get him on my side." Mia frowned. "Who?" Ginevra lifted the phone slightly. "The man, the one I'm supposed to meet." She forced herself to think logically through the panic clawing at her brain. Obviously they want something from him if they're sending me in first. Why else would this be a blind date? Her words began tumbling faster now, frantic and messy. Maybe they want me close to him. Maybe they want information or leverage or for me to betray him somehow. "And your plan," Mia said slowly, "is to warn the Mafia boss. When you say it like that, it sounds insane." "Because it is insane, Ginny." Ginevra surged to her feet abruptly, too restless to stay still another second. Adrenaline flooded her limbs in violent waves. She began pacing the tiny apartment. "What else am I supposed to do?" she snapped. "Tell me, because I am completely out of ideas." Her breathing quickened again. Too fast. The walls suddenly felt too close together. Her chest tightened painfully. What if she walked into that lounge and never walked back out? What if the man took one look at her and realized immediately she'd been sent there for a setup? What if he handed her over himself? What if this was all a test? Her hands started trembling. "Oh my God!" She pressed both palms against her forehead. What if they're watching us right now? Mia immediately stood. Gin, what if they know we're talking about this? What if going to the police gets her killed? What if not going gets her killed? Her voice rose sharply. What if I'm already too late? Hey, hey! Mia crossed the room quickly and grabbed her shoulders. Breathe. But Ginevra couldn't. Every horrible possibility crashed through her mind at once until she thought she might suffocate under the weight of them. Mia shook her gently. Ginny, look at me. Her eyes burned with tears. I think... Ginevra inhaled shakily. I think if I can get him to trust me, maybe he helps me. Maybe we have a chance. Mia looked seconds away from either screaming or breaking down herself. We should go to the police, she said desperately. There has to be someone that can help. Ginevra laughed once, hollow and humorless. If movies and books taught me anything, it's that men like this own people. She wiped at her face angrily. Police, politicians, lawyers, everyone has a price. That's fiction. Is it? Neither spoke for several seconds. The ticking clock on the wall sounded deafening. Finally, Mia looked toward it and swore softly. Okay, we have 2 hours. She inhaled deeply like she was forcing herself into survival mode. 2 hours to get you ready for a date. Another horrified pause. A blind date with a possible mob boss. Ginevra let out a weak laugh despite herself. Jesus Christ, Mia muttered. What does one even wear to impress the Mafia? That finally made Ginevra stop pacing. She thought about the photos, the instructions, the calculated nature of all of this. Simple, she said quietly. Elegant. I don't want to look desperate. Her stomach churned again. And I definitely don't want to look like I'm throwing myself at him. Lunch date? Lunch date, Ginevra confirmed, except neither of them believed that for a second. An hour later, she stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, staring at a version of herself she barely recognized. The smoky navy dress hugged her waist before falling into an elegant A-line skirt. The boat neckline exposed the delicate line of her collarbones without revealing too much skin. Sophisticated, controlled, safe. Or at least, she hoped so. Her hands shook as she unclasped the silver cross from around her neck. She hesitated before placing it carefully beside the jewelry box. In its place, she fastened the pearl solitaire earrings her mother had bought her years ago. She'd nearly pawned them 3 months earlier when rent had been overdue. Now they glittered softly beneath the warm bedroom light like ghosts from another life. Her hair was pinned back neatly with a few loose strands framing her face, soft enough to appear approachable, structured enough to hide how badly she was falling apart inside. For several seconds, she simply stared at herself, trying to look brave, trying to look like a woman walking into a date instead of a hostage negotiation. From the doorway, Mia watched silently, arms folded tightly across her chest. I should come with you, she said at last. Ginevra looked at her through the mirror. No. I'll sit at another table. I'll watch something. No. Mia's eyes glistened instantly. I'm going to stress eat all night waiting for your call. That earned the smallest smile from Ginevra. It vanished quickly. Mia stepped closer. Her voice dropped into something fragile and terrified. Please promise me something, Ginny. Ginevra turned slowly. If things go bad, Mia's composure finally cracked completely. If something feels wrong, her eyes filled with panic. Run, just run and don't stop. Ginny crossed the room in 2 quick steps and wrapped her arms around Mia tightly. For a second, neither of them spoke. They just held onto each other like drowning people trying not to sink. Mia's hands fisted in the back of her dress, hard enough to wrinkle the fabric. Plan B, Ginny whispered against her hair. Mia pulled back slightly, wiping at her eyes. Plan B, she echoed shakily. Ginny forced herself to think clearly through the panic still clawing at her nerves. I've got a stash, too. She gave a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. Cash, passport, spare phone charger, clothes. Her throat tightened. I made a go bag a while ago after everything with Laura. She hesitated. You? Mia sucked in a breath like she hated that the conversation had become real enough to require escape plans. I'll pack one tonight. Her voice trembled. If someone comes here, I run. No heroics, no waiting around. She pointed toward the door as if convincing herself. I'll meet you at Zim's. At the mention of the old roadside motel, something ugly twisted in Ginny's chest. Zim's had always been their joke place. Cheap rooms, terrible coffee, the owner who never asked questions. They used to go there on road trips when they were younger, because Laura claimed the vending machine had spiritual energy. Now it had become a contingency plan if the Mafia came hunting them. Zim's, Ginny confirmed quietly. Saying it aloud made this all feel horrifyingly real. I'll message you updates when I can. Her fingers tightened around the black burner phone, still sitting in her palm. But Mia, her stomach churned violently again. I don't know anything about the men who sent these photos, or what Laura got herself into. Mia took her hand carefully, squeezing it. We're always fixing Laura's disasters, Ginny. There wasn't anger in her voice anymore, just exhaustion, years and years of it. First things first, you talk to him. If it's safe, give him the information. She swallowed hard. Then let him handle the rest, if he really is Mafia. Her expression darkened uneasily. He'd have contacts, resources, men. Ginny studied her friend carefully, too carefully, because suddenly Mia wouldn't meet her eyes. What aren't you saying? Mia blinked quickly. Nothing. Mia. Her friend let out a frustrated breath and paced toward the kitchen before turning back. Laura is many things, Ginny. Her voice cracked slightly. But loyal. She shook her head slowly. No, not anymore. Sadness replaced frustration almost instantly. Then out of nowhere you get cryptic messages, violent photos, and instructions to meet some tattooed stranger in a suit. She rubbed at her forehead. I'm just saying, something feels wrong about all of it. Ginny looked down at the matte black phone in her hands. It suddenly felt heavier than before. Colder, too. You don't think it's real? Mia didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched painfully between them while the clock ticked somewhere in the apartment. Finally, she sat heavily on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor. I think, she said slowly, the Laura we loved disappeared years ago. Her voice softened with grief. Ever since the drugs, it's been one disaster after another. Lies, men, money, running. She looked up finally, eyes glassy. And every single time, we dropped everything to save her. Ginny's chest tightened painfully because she knew it was true. Missed rent payments, midnight phone calls, emergency hospital visits, bail money they couldn't afford, excuses, tears, promises to get clean that never lasted more than a week. And somehow Laura always made them feel guilty for being angry about it. We can't keep saving her from herself, Mia whispered. At some point she has to want saving. The words settled heavily into the room. Ginny stared at the floor for several long seconds before finally giving a small nod. Not agreement exactly, but acceptance that Mia might be right. Okay, she whispered. Then she looked toward the mirror again and immediately felt her pulse spike. In less than an hour, she would walk into a private lounge to meet a man she knew nothing about, a man dangerous enough that criminals were using her as bait to get close to him. Her stomach flipped violently. Oh my God, she breathed, suddenly feeling lightheaded all over again. I'm so friggin' nervous." Ginny stood at the marble bar inside the exclusive Amara Lounge, trying very hard not to look like a woman on the verge of a complete psychological collapse. The first shock had come at the front entrance, when the hostess had smiled politely and said, "Welcome, Miss Ginevra. Your party has already arrived." Her party, that had nearly sent her straight back out the door. A deeply irrational part of her had genuinely hoped the entire thing was fake, that she'd arrive and no reservation would exist, and she could go home, crawl into bed, and pretend none of this nightmare had happened. Instead, someone had known her full name, which somehow made the entire situation infinitely worse. The second shock had been the actual lounge itself. Amara was less restaurant and more rich people lair. Low golden lighting reflected off polished black stone floors, while crystal chandeliers glittered overhead like tiny suspended galaxies. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume, whiskey, and money. So much money, Ginny recognized at least 3 celebrities within the first 30 seconds. A politician she'd seen on the news was laughing beside a woman in diamonds that put the sun to shame. Every man looked tailored. Every woman looked surgically moisturized. Meanwhile, Ginny was standing there internally screaming while pretending she belonged. She downed 2 fingers of whiskey almost immediately after reaching the bar. The bartender blinked once at the speed. "Long day?" he asked carefully. "You have absolutely no idea." The whiskey burned all the way down, settling warmly in her stomach and loosening exactly 3% of her panic, which honestly felt generous. Unfortunately, now she was also slightly tipsy, not drunk, just enough that her legs felt suspiciously floaty and her internal monologue had become louder. "Okay, Ginny," she told herself firmly, "you are a sophisticated woman meeting a possible mafia boss. You are calm, elegant, mysterious." Her brain immediately countered, "You nearly threw up in the Uber." Fair point. She ordered another drink mostly because her hand needed something to hold besides a visible nervous breakdown. Then she turned slowly, scanning the room again, and saw him. Corner booth, black suit, dark hair, tattooed hands resting calmly against a crystal tumbler. Even from across the room there was something deeply dangerous about him. Not loud danger, worse, quiet danger, the kind that didn't need to announce itself because everyone around him already knew. He sat sprawled comfortably against the leather booth, while 3 other men occupied nearby tables, pretending not to watch the room. They failed miserably. One of them actually scanned her like she might pull a rocket launcher out of her clutch purse. Rude. Ginny took another sip of whiskey. Okay, Italian, black suit, terrifyingly attractive. This had to be him. Her heart began hammering so hard she was convinced people could hear it over the music as she crossed the lounge toward him. Every step felt surreal, like she was walking into a movie she absolutely had not auditioned for. As she approached, the man looked up slowly. And dear God, that did not help her nerves. He was devastatingly handsome in a sharp, unfair sort of way. Strong jaw, dark eyes, expensive watch, the kind of face women ruined their lives over willingly. Ginny's survival instincts took one look at him and immediately filed a complaint. She slid into the booth across from him before she could lose courage completely. "Hi," she said brightly, which was impressive considering her soul was actively trying to leave her body. "You're my date, right? I'm Ginny." One of his brows lifted slightly, then his hand flicked once. Tiny movement. But she caught it, and suddenly realized every man around them had shifted subtly at the exact same time. "Oh no, oh no, no, no." Her smile faltered. She looked at him properly, then at the men nearby. Then back at him. "You're—" Her stomach dropped. "Not my date, are you?" "No," he said calmly. His voice was deep and smooth with a slight Italian accent that absolutely did not help the situation. Ginny closed her eyes briefly. Of course. Of course, the first man she approached in a Mafia lounge would be the wrong, terrifying Italian man. Naturally, because apparently God hated her specifically. "I am so sorry," she said quickly, laughing in pure panic as she grabbed her drink. "I'm on a blind date. I was told Italian, black suit, tattoos." She gestured vaguely toward him, which, in hindsight, may describe half the men in this building. One of the nearby guards snorted. The man himself remained unreadable. Ginny slid awkwardly toward the edge of the booth. "Cista e imbarazzanti," she muttered under her breath. "This is awkward," then immediately froze because she'd forgotten herself and slipped into Sicilian. Mortified, she shook her head quickly. "Sorry, I'll just... stop." The single word halted her instantly. The man extended an arm casually across the booth opening, blocking her exit without even standing. Every nearby guard moved again, not aggressively, efficiently, like wolves lifting their heads at the same sound. Ginny went completely still. The man studied her intently now. "What did you say?" Her eyes widened. "I'm sorry." Not the correct answer, apparently. His gaze sharpened further. "Do you know who I am?" Ginny blinked at him, then actually took a second to study him properly. Expensive suit, scar near his jaw, tattoo disappearing beneath his collar, 3 armed men pretending not to guard him. Oh, she swallowed. "I don't." Slowly, he removed his arm from the booth opening. "Stay." It wasn't a request. He motioned toward the bartender without looking away from her. Another whiskey appeared moments later, like the staff had been summoned through fear alone. His eyes dropped to her current glass. "You have good taste." Ginny stared at him for one dangerous second too long before answering honestly. "Blind date," she admitted. "I needed something strong." For the first time, his lips twitched. "So," he said smoothly, leaning back against the leather booth like a man entirely accustomed to people fearing him. "What brings you to my establishment, miss?" "Ferrante," she answered automatically, "but Ginny is fine." The second the surname left her mouth, one of the men at the nearby table looked over, not dramatically, just enough to notice, which somehow felt more threatening. Ginny pretended not to see it while taking another careful sip of whiskey. She looked around the lounge instead, genuinely distracted now that her pulse had stopped trying to kill her. Then she waved vaguely toward the glittering room. "This is all yours." Her brows lifted. "Truly?" One side of his mouth tilted upward faintly. "You sound surprised." "I am surprised." She gestured again. "I thought Mafia establishments were supposed to have dim back rooms and men named Tony chopping garlic in the kitchen." A nearby guard choked on his drink. The man across from her stared at her for a long moment before a low laugh escaped him unexpectedly. It changed his whole face, which honestly felt unfair. "You watch too many movies, Ginny Ferrante." "I watch exactly enough movies to know I've probably made several poor life choices tonight." "You approached the wrong man in a private lounge full of criminals," he agreed. "That is at least one poor choice." "See?" She pointed at him triumphantly. "You get it." His amusement deepened slightly as he lifted his whiskey glass. "And yet you stayed." Ginny opened her mouth, paused, then frowned at herself because, annoyingly, he had a point. "I think," she admitted carefully, "leaving suddenly felt ruder somehow." One of the guards muttered something in Italian under his breath that sounded suspiciously like "she's insane." "Honestly?" "Fair." The man's attention returned fully to her. "You spoke Sicilian." Ginny immediately knew she'd made a mistake. because his interest sharpened again. "A little," she said cautiously. "A little?" His dark brow lifted. "No, not a little. Your pronunciation was natural." "Well," she winced slightly. "My grandmother would haunt me from the grave if it wasn't." That earned another small twitch of amusement from him. "Your family is Sicilian?" "Siracusa," she answered before she could stop herself. The effect was immediate. Something shifted in his expression. Not softer exactly, but more focused, interested. "Siracusa," he repeated slowly. "What part?" "Oh, God!" Ginny laughed nervously. "You're asking questions I absolutely should know the answers to." She pointed at herself. "Bad Italian descendant, terrible, shameful." "You do not know?" "I know food recipes." She counted on her fingers. "I know guilt. I know emotional overfeeding. I know every family argument somehow becomes about olive oil quality." She took another sip of whiskey. "Actual geography, less successful." Another laugh escaped him quietly. Apparently this terrifying man found her stupidity entertaining. "Excellent. We lived near the water," she added finally. "That's all I really remember hearing growing up." "Ortigia, perhaps." Her eyes widened. "Maybe. Honestly, that sounds familiar enough that I'm willing to lie and say yes confidently." One of the guards outright laughed this time. Ginny pointed accusingly toward him. "You laugh, but if someone asked me American geography, I'd still fail. This country is too large. Why are there so many empty bits?" The guard shook his head, muttering something in Italian again. "She talks too much," he translated dryly. Ginny gasped theatrically. "Rude. I'm under immense stress. This is coping." The man across from her watched her over the rim of his glass now with unmistakable fascination, like she was something he hadn't expected to encounter tonight. "Your parents immigrated?" The question dimmed her humor slightly. She rolled the glass slowly between her hands. "My grandparents did." She shrugged one shoulder. "My family situation is—" She made a vague circular motion. "Complicated." His expression remained unreadable, but attentive. "My mother and I barely speak," she admitted, "and my father—" Her throat tightened briefly. "Well, he exited the storyline years ago." "You do not know where he is?" Ginny snorted softly. "Honestly, could be dead, could be in Alaska, both equally likely." That earned another startled laugh from the guard. She pointed again. "I think he likes me." "He thinks you are chaotic." She considered that and gave an accepting nod. The man's lips twitched again, though his eyes remained intent on her. "And your mother?" Ginny exhaled slowly through her nose. "My mother and I are experts at avoiding emotional intimacy." She smiled faintly, though sadness touched the edges of it. "We mostly communicate through passive-aggressive holiday texts." "She does not speak to you." "She speaks." Ginny tilted her hand. "Mostly to inform me I'm disappointing her in fresh and creative ways." "For example?" Ginny counted on her fingers dramatically. "Not married, no grandchildren, I swear too much. Not Catholic enough, too independent. Once bought pre-made cannoli instead of making them from scratch." She looked genuinely ashamed at the last one. That one was apparently unforgivable. The man stared at her for 2 long seconds, then unexpectedly lowered his head with a quiet laugh that seemed almost involuntary. Somewhere between the second whiskey, the handmade truffle pasta, and listening to one of his guards passionately argue that pineapple on pizza was an international crime, Ginny realized with absolute horror that she was enjoying herself, actually enjoying herself, which felt deeply inappropriate considering she was technically sitting in a luxury Mafia lounge under possible kidnapping-related circumstances. Yet somehow here she was, laughing into her drink while one of the guards insisted Canadians couldn't be trusted because they hide their aggression behind politeness. Ginny had immediately defended Canadians despite never having met one. "It's called emotional stability," she informed him. "It is called suspicious," the guard argued. The man across from her watched the exchange quietly, amusement lingering in his dark eyes while the waiter refreshed their drinks yet again. At some point, Ginny had stopped mentally referring to him as terrifying Mafia stranger and started thinking of him as devastatingly attractive Mafia stranger, which honestly felt like a dangerous personal decline. The lounge buzzed softly around them with music, low conversation, and the occasional clink of crystal glasses. Candlelight danced across polished marble and dark leather booths, while wealthy people carried on around them, blissfully unaware that Ginny was internally one bad thought away from a panic attack. Or perhaps 2 whiskeys away from asking inappropriate questions, possibly both. By the time dessert arrived, a tiny chocolate thing so expensive it probably had its own accountant, she'd nearly forgotten the real reason she was there. Nearly, because every now and then the black phone sitting inside her clutch felt like it weighed 1,000 kilos. Every vibration from another guest's phone made her stomach tighten. Every glance toward the entrance made her wonder if someone was watching. Still, the man across from her made it strangely easy to lose focus. He listened when she spoke, really listened. He'd asked questions about her work, her grandmother, even her opinions on food with an intensity that should have been intimidating but somehow wasn't. He carried himself with quiet authority, and everyone around him reacted accordingly. Yet he'd spent nearly an hour discussing Sicilian dialects with her, like it genuinely interested him, which was absurd, because men who looked like him usually didn't care what women said, unless they were removing clothing while saying it. And yet here he was, listening intently while she passionately explained why supermarket gnocchi felt emotionally offensive. "You are very expressive when angry about food," he observed dryly. "It's cultural. It is dramatic." "That too." His lips twitched again, but while Ginny slowly relaxed, the man across from her had become increasingly certain of one thing. She had not approached him by accident. Not entirely. The moment her name had appeared on his guest list earlier that evening, suspicion had immediately followed. Nobody added guests under his personal reservation without permission. Nobody. His staff knew better. His security team knew better, which meant someone with access had either been bribed, threatened, or deliberately instructed to place her there, and that alone made her dangerous. At first he'd assumed she knew exactly who he was. Most people did, especially people sent to approach him. Yet the longer the evening continued, the more convinced he became that Ginevra Ferrante genuinely had no idea. She hadn't flinched at his name because she'd never asked for it. She hadn't recognized his men, hadn't recognized the deference staff showed him, hadn't even noticed half the room, subtly tracking their interaction all night. Instead, she'd walked into his lounge, insulted Canadian stereotypes, accidentally spoken Sicilian, and nearly sat at the wrong table while carrying enough nervous energy to power the city grid. No trained informant behaved like that. No professional setup drank whiskey that fast either, which begged a far more interesting question. Why was she really here? And more importantly, who had sent her? He watched her now as she laughed softly at something one of his guards muttered under his breath. Her smile reached her eyes naturally. No manipulation, no calculated seduction. If anything, she seemed genuinely startled whenever he looked at her too long. Fear still lingered beneath her composure, though. He could see it in the tiny tells. The way her fingers occasionally brushed the clutch bag beside her, the slight tightening in her shoulders whenever someone approached the table unexpectedly. The way her attention drifted toward exits automatically before returning to him. She was nervous, not manipulative, which made her infinitely more interesting. One of his men approached quietly, then leaned down near his shoulder, speaking low enough that Ginny couldn't hear. She arrived alone, the guard murmured in Italian. No visible surveillance. We checked the entry cameras. Nothing suspicious yet. Yet. He gave a slight nod without taking his eyes off her, because despite how relaxed the evening appeared, he had no intention of leaving things unresolved, not even close. He would continue the charade here in the main lounge, where she felt comfortable, safe enough to keep talking, safe enough to reveal something willingly. But afterward? Afterward, he intended to take this conversation upstairs, to the penthouse, alone, and then he would find out exactly why Ginevra Ferrante had been sent to him. The conversation had drifted into dangerously comfortable territory when Ginny's phone suddenly buzzed against the table. A loud duck quack echoed through the booth. Not a subtle duck quack either, a full, aggressive farm animal quack. Several nearby heads turned. One of his guards looked personally offended. Ginny froze mid-sip, horrified. "Oh my God," she whispered, fumbling for the phone. "I forgot that was my notification sound." The man across from her looked almost amused. "A duck? In my defense," she said quickly, "it was funny when I said it." "It is still funny. That's because you're not experiencing the shame personally." Another violent quack erupted. Ginny groaned. "That'll be my roommate entering emotional collapse." She held up the phone slightly. "Do you mind if I get that? Mia's currently stress-eating her way through our weekly groceries while I'm on a blind date." One dark brow lifted. "Stress-eating? She copes through carbohydrates." Ginny sighed. Last time she panicked, she ate an entire garlic bread and cried during a documentary about whales. One of the guards barked out a laugh before quickly pretending he hadn't. The man motioned lightly with his glass. "Go ahead." Ginny unlocked the phone without much thought, holding it low enough that if he wanted to snoop, he absolutely could, which honestly said a lot about how relaxed she'd become around a possible criminal overlord in under 2 hours. That probably deserved self-reflection later. Her screen lit up with 6 consecutive messages from Mia. "Mia, are you alive? Mia, blink twice if kidnapped. Mia, I have eaten half a cheesecake. Mia, panic escalating. Mia, should I call someone? Mia, I don't know who but someone." Ginny snorted unexpectedly into her drink. "What?" he asked. "My roommate thinks I've been murdered." She typed quickly with one hand. "Not dead." A pause. "Actually, having a good time." Another pause while she glanced up at the devastatingly handsome man, watching her with quiet interest. Sexy, hot guy. Updates incoming. She hit send before she could reconsider the wording. 3 dots appeared instantly. Then, "Mia, excuse me. Mia, you went to possible organized crime speed dating and found a hot guy?" Ginny bit the inside of her cheek hard to stop herself laughing aloud. "What?" he asked again, this time clearly more curious. She's confused by the situation. "Aren't you?" Ginny considered that honestly. Yes, deeply, constantly, but somehow not in the way she'd expected. "I think," she admitted slowly, locking the phone again, "I expected tonight to feel more terrifying. And instead?" She looked around the lounge, the music, the candlelight, the whiskey warming her veins, the dangerously attractive Sicilian man across from her, watching her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Then she sighed dramatically. "Now I'm concerned I may have accidentally wandered into the world's most threatening therapy session." One of the guards nearly inhaled his drink. The man across from her leaned back slightly, studying her with unmistakable amusement now. "You joke when nervous." "I joke when breathing." "That explains much." Ginny pointed at him accusingly. "You keep saying things like that as if I'm the unusual one here." "You approached armed men voluntarily." "In my defense, you're all very well dressed." She hadn't been expecting the shift in conversation. One moment they'd been debating whether garlic bread counted as a personality trait, and the next, the atmosphere changed so subtly she almost missed it entirely. Almost. But Ginny's nerves had been frayed raw long before she walked into the lounge. Add several glasses of expensive whiskey to the equation, and her ability to detect danger had become fuzzy around the edges. Not gone. Just softened enough that she didn't realize she'd wandered straight into a trap until she was already standing in it. The man across from her remained perfectly relaxed, one arm draped along the back of the leather booth, expression unreadable except for the faint amusement lingering around his mouth. To anyone watching, it still looked like harmless conversation between two attractive people sharing drinks late at night. But his eyes had sharpened, just slightly, enough for her stomach to tighten instinctively. "And yet," he said casually, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "you still haven't told me why you came here tonight." There it was, simple, smooth, dropped into the conversation so naturally it almost sounded harmless. Almost. Ginny blinked once, trying to buy herself time while her alcohol-fogged brain scrambled into motion. Her pulse stumbled awkwardly in her chest. "Oh!" She laughed lightly, too lightly. "You mean besides the obvious thrill of humiliating myself in front of wealthy strangers?" His gaze stayed fixed on her. That single sound told her he wasn't letting it go. Damn it. She reached automatically for her drink, even though she absolutely did not need more alcohol. Liquid courage had crossed the line into liquid poor decision-making about 20 minutes ago. Still, she took another sip, because apparently self-preservation had left the building entirely. "I did technically tell you," she said carefully. "Blind date. And you accepted an invitation from an unnamed man." When you say it out loud like that, it does sound concerning. "It sounds reckless." Ginny pointed at him immediately. "See now, that's unfair coming from someone who radiates criminal energy." One of the guards coughed violently into his drink, trying not to laugh. The man ignored him completely. "Who arranged the date?" The question landed softly, too softly, like he already knew there was something underneath all this and was simply waiting for her to decide whether to lie. Ginny suddenly became very aware of how isolated the booth felt, despite the crowded lounge around them. Candlelight flickered across polished glass. Music drifted through the room. Wealthy people laughed nearby. And yet all her focus narrowed to the man watching her, patiently across the table. Interested, alert, dangerous. The whiskey buzzing warmly through her veins made it harder to stay careful, harder to maintain the thin wall between panic and composure. Because the truth was she was exhausted. Exhausted from fear, exhausted from thinking, exhausted from carrying the weight of those photographs around in her chest all evening while pretending everything was normal. And worst of all, a horrible part of her actually trusted him a little, which felt absolutely insane. "You ask a lot of questions," she muttered finally. A faint smile touched his mouth. "You avoid many answers." That sounds psychologically manipulative. It probably is. That startled a laugh out of her despite herself. God help her. He waited until the sound faded before speaking again, quieter this time. "You were nervous when you arrived." Ginny's fingers tightened slightly around her glass. "You drank quickly." I stand by that decision. You kept checking the exits. Her breath caught. You watched every man who approached this table. His tone remained calm, observant rather than accusing. And every time your phone moved, your pulse changed. Ginny stared at him. Oh, he was dangerous, not because of guns or guards or whispered authority, because he noticed things, too many things. Her stomach flipped uneasily. I'm feeling very perceived right now, she informed him weakly. One of his brows lifted slightly. She exhaled slowly and rubbed a hand over her face. Okay, wow, that sounded less flirty in my head. The corner of his mouth twitched. You interest me, Ginny Ferrante. The words should not have affected her the way they did, but they settled low in her stomach anyway, warm, complicated, terrifying, because beneath the humor and the whiskey and the strange chemistry building between them, she suddenly realized something important. He had known from the beginning that something was wrong, and instead of walking away from it, he'd gotten curious. Ginny stared at the amber liquid in her glass for several long seconds while her thoughts spiraled violently. Tell him, don't tell him, run, stay, cry dramatically in the bathroom and escape through a window, all equally valid options at this point. The problem was she'd reached the dangerous stage of fear where instinct started outweighing logic, and every instinct she had was screaming the same thing now. He already knows something is wrong. The question was whether trusting him would save her or ruin her completely. She became suddenly aware of just how many people occupied the lounge around them. Staff gliding silently between tables, politicians laughing over wine, wealthy socialites pretending not to stare at the handsome Sicilian man in the corner booth, and his guards, always the guards, calm, watchful, alert. Even now she could feel eyes drifting toward them occasionally, measuring, assessing, watching his reactions. Too many eyes. Way too many eyes. Ginny swallowed slowly before leaning forward slightly across the table. Hypothetically, she said carefully, if someone had information they wanted to give you. His attention sharpened instantly. But, she added quickly, they also thought there was a possibility they were being watched while giving you said information. One dark brow lifted. You're speaking strangely. I'm panicking creatively. The corner of his mouth twitched faintly. Ginny lowered her voice further. I don't think this conversation should happen here. For the first time that evening, the amusement faded almost completely from his expression. Not hostility, focus, dangerous focus. His fingers tapped once against the side of his whiskey glass as he studied her face carefully now, like he was reassessing every moment of the night all over again. You were sent here, he said quietly, not a question. Ginny's stomach dropped. She glanced around instinctively before forcing herself not to look suspicious, which unfortunately probably made her look more suspicious. Excellent work, Ginny. Very subtle. I got photographs, she admitted softly. His expression did not change, which somehow scared her more. Photographs of what? She hesitated. Even now, saying it aloud felt dangerous. I'll tell you, she whispered, but not here. One of the guards nearby shifted slightly at the tone in her voice. She noticed immediately. So did he. Too many ears, too many unknowns. And suddenly the entire glamorous lounge felt suffocating instead of beautiful. Ginny's pulse began hammering again. What if whoever sent her had people inside the building? What if they were watching right now to make sure she followed instructions? What if this entire thing was a setup to see whether she'd warn him? The thought made cold panic slide down her spine. She felt like prey, like a mouse carefully walking into a trap while trying desperately to pretend she wasn't terrified. And the worst part, there was no version of this where she walked away untouched. No perfect ending, no heroic rescue. Only better odds. Maybe. If she played this right. She inhaled slowly before making a decision that felt absolutely insane. Could you... She stopped immediately as heat crept into her face. His gaze remained fixed on her, waiting. Ginny pressed a hand briefly against her forehead. Okay, this is going to sound unhinged. That has not stopped you before. One of the guards made a choking sound that suspiciously resembled laughter. She ignored him. If someone is watching, she said carefully, then I can't suddenly look frightened or serious or like I'm confessing something. Her pulse climbed higher the longer she spoke. It has to look believable. Understanding flickered faintly in his eyes now. Ginny looked around the crowded lounge again before leaning closer. So I was thinking... Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. Maybe you could pretend you're taking me upstairs for... She gestured vaguely between them. You know. One dark brow lifted slowly. Ginny wanted the floor to open and consume her. Oh my God, I sound insane, she muttered. Forget I said that. You want me to pretend we are lovers. When you phrase it like that, it sounds significantly more dramatic. You suggested making out as cover. Her face burst into flames. I did not say making out. You implied it. I implied vague sexual tension. Now both guards nearby were visibly trying not to laugh. Traitors. Ginny covered part of her face with one hand. This is genuinely the most humiliating moment of my life. No, he said calmly. The wrong table was worse. She stared at him in betrayal. Then, despite everything, the fear, the danger, the impossible situation, he smiled. Small, dangerous, interested, and Ginny realized with fresh panic that he was actually considering it. He was doing far more than considering it. The moment the suggestion left her mouth, something changed in his expression completely. Not hesitation, not caution, decision. A slow smile spread across his face, sharp and devastating enough that Ginny immediately understood how women ended up making catastrophically poor life choices around men like him. It was the kind of smile that belonged in warning labels. Oh, she breathed before she could stop herself. One dark brow lifted slightly. Oh? That smile borders on criminal. It should, he said smoothly. I am criminal. One of the guards lost the battle against laughter entirely. Before Ginny could recover enough dignity to respond, Domenico slid from the booth in one fluid movement. The entire lounge subtly shifted around him the second he stood. Conversations quieted slightly. Staff straightened instinctively. Power, not loud, not performative, just absolute. Then he moved toward her. Ginny's pulse immediately lost all remaining common sense. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she caught the scent of whiskey, expensive cologne, and something darker underneath. Her breath snagged embarrassingly as he reached down and gently took hold of her wrist. Up, he murmured. The word alone sent heat racing into her face. She stood automatically, her heels wobbling slightly from nerves and alcohol. Before she could regain balance properly, he pulled her smoothly against him, chest to chest. Solid warmth, strong hands settling lightly at her waist. Ginny's entire brain short-circuited. Oh, this was significantly more convincing than she'd anticipated. Her palms instinctively pressed against his chest to steady herself, and immediately regretted it because, dear God, the man felt carved from marble beneath the suit. He looked down at her with open amusement now. Smile, he said quietly near her ear. You look like a lamb being led to slaughter. That's because internally I am screaming. Convincingly, professionally. His thumb brushed once against her waist, subtle enough no one else would notice. Relax. easy for him to say. He looked like the kind of man born comfortable in dangerous situations, while Ginny currently felt like a nervous woodland creature wearing expensive earrings. Still, she forced a smile onto her face as he guided her through the lounge. His arm remained around her waist possessively enough that no one questioned their exit. In fact, several people openly stared. One woman near the bar actually looked offended. Ginny resisted the urge to wave apologetically. As they crossed the room, one of the guards stepped forward automatically. "Boss?" Domenico held out his hand without looking away from Ginny. Her clutch. "Oh." Ginny blinked before surrendering it. "Please don't judge the contents. There's emergency gum, anxiety medication, and approximately 14 lipsticks that all look identical." The guard took the clutch carefully like it might explode. "You carry medication." "She means candy," Domenico said dryly. Ginny looked up at him. That was weirdly perceptive. "You are nervous enough already." That actually helped. She barely noticed they'd reached the private elevator until the doors slid open silently before them. Domenico guided her inside, one hand still resting at the small of her back. The doors closed. The second they were alone, Ginny exhaled sharply. "Holy shit!" His lips twitched. "I think one of those women at the bar wanted to kill me. They always want to kill someone." "That is not reassuring." The elevator climbed smoothly upward while her heart continued trying to punch directly through her ribs. She became vaguely aware of security following behind in another lift. Everything suddenly felt very real again. Not flirting over whiskey real, dangerous real. "What the hell are you doing, Ginny? Going upstairs with a stranger who openly admitted to being criminal, a stranger whose guards carried weapons under tailored jackets. Her mother would absolutely die, then probably resurrect herself, just to kill Ginny personally." The elevator doors opened into a private hallway lined with dark marble and soft lighting. Security stood waiting nearby but peeled away almost immediately, disappearing toward another corridor. "Where are they going?" Ginny asked quietly. "Security room." "You have a security room?" "Yes." "Of course you do." Domenico guided her forward again, slower this time, less performance, more deliberate. She suddenly became acutely aware that they were alone now, truly alone. And somehow that felt even more dangerous than the crowded lounge downstairs. Not because she thought he'd hurt her, which honestly should have concerned her more than it did, but because she had the terrifying suspicion he could dismantle her composure entirely if he wanted to. They stopped outside a set of dark double doors. Ginny looked up at him finally, nerves fluttering violently all over again. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. For a second, he simply stared down at her. Then slowly, a devastatingly handsome smile spread across his face. "Domenico Di Stefano." The name hit her like a physical blow. Domenico Di Stefano. Every ounce of color drained from Ginny's face so fast she actually swayed. "Oh my God!" Her knees buckled. For one horrifying second, she genuinely thought she might collapse directly onto the polished marble floor like a fainting Victorian woman. Domenico caught her immediately, one arm locking firmly around her waist before she could fall. "Well," he murmured dryly, "that reaction is concerning." "This is bad," she whispered. No, bad didn't even begin to cover it. Her pulse exploded into outright hysteria as pieces slammed together violently inside her head. The photos, the blind date, the secrecy, the warnings. Mia's face when she'd told her to run. Domenico Di Stefano. Even she knew that name. Not details, not specifics, but enough. Enough whispered stories, enough newspaper headlines half buried online, enough rumors attached to wealth, violence, and power. Jesus Christ. Oh my God, she said again, rubbing a shaking hand down her face. Oh my God, I'm going to die. Domenico watched her carefully now, all traces of amusement gone. Ginevra. No, no, no. Panic flooded out of her in a rush. This is bad. This is really, really bad. She moved from his arms and started pacing immediately, heels clicking wildly against marble while adrenaline tore through her bloodstream. Her thoughts became tangled and frantic. What if Laura had stolen from him? What if this was retaliation? What if she'd accidentally walked directly into Mafia politics with the survival instincts of a concussed squirrel? I knew it, she muttered hysterically. I knew I was being led to slaughter. Mia literally said run. She specifically said run. Domenico stepped toward her. Calm yourself. I can't calm myself, she pointed at him wildly. You're Domenico friggin' Di Stefano. Yes, that is not a reassuring answer. One corner of his mouth almost twitched despite the situation. Ginny made another distressed sound and shoved both hands into her hair. I don't want to be part of this. Her voice cracked badly now. I don't even know if any of this is real or fake or some setup or what Laura's done this time. At the mention of Laura, his expression sharpened instantly. There. That. He knew the name. Ginny saw it happen and nearly burst into tears on the spot. Oh, God, you know her. She laughed and cried at once in pure panic. Of course you know her. Why wouldn't you know her? Everyone dangerous apparently knows Laura. Ginny, she's a disaster. The words tumbled out uncontrollably now. A complete disaster. Mia and I have spent our lives cleaning up her messes and dragging her out of terrible situations, and she never learns. Dom remained perfectly still, listening. She gets involved with awful men and drugs and stupid schemes and then cries when everything explodes. Ginny's breathing turned ragged, and now there are photos and threats and blind dates, and I don't even know what this is all about. She yanked out her phone with trembling fingers and shoved it directly against his chest. Here. Domenico took it slowly. Look at them, she whispered desperately. Please just tell me what's happening because I swear to God I don't know anything. Her eyes burned with panic and tears now. I'm not part of whatever this is. He glanced down at the screen, the photographs, the messages. His expression changed instantly, not shock, something colder, far more dangerous. Ginny saw it happen, and her stomach dropped straight through the floor. Oh, God, she whispered, it's real, isn't it? Domenico lifted his gaze to hers slowly. The silence became unbearable, and for the first time since arriving, she looked genuinely terrified of him, not nervous, not flustered, afraid. Something unreadable flickered across Domenico's face at the sight. He had absolutely no idea what do with that. Then suddenly he moved. One hand came up, sliding against her jaw gently but firmly enough to still her spiraling panic. Before Ginny could process what was happening, he pulled her against him and kissed her. The shock of it stole the breath from her lungs completely. Warm, decisive, not soft exactly, but controlled, like he was trying to silence the panic pouring out of her mouth more than seduce her. Ginny froze against him in stunned confusion, fingers instinctively clutching the front of his suit as her brain short-circuited entirely. When he finally pulled back slightly, his forehead rested briefly against hers. First, he said quietly, voice low and steady, you need to breathe. It took Domenico less than 5 minutes to understand the outline of the situation, and less than 3 to realize Ginny Ferrante had been nothing more than a pawn shoved onto the board by someone else. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, scrolling silently through the messages and photographs, while Ginny sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa, trying not to actively hyperventilate. The city glittered below them in gold and white streaks, but the warmth from downstairs had vanished completely. The penthouse felt colder somehow, sharper, more dangerous, especially now that Domenico had gone quiet. Very quiet. Ginny had quickly learned silence from him was infinitely more terrifying than amusement. She watched tension gather subtly through his shoulders as he moved through the conversation history again. Every now and then his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Not at her. At the situation. At Laura. The second Ginny had said the name, pieces had already started falling into place for him. Laura Bianchi, beautiful, manipulative, persistent, and apparently incapable of accepting rejection like a sane person. Domenico had met her almost a year earlier through mutual associates. At first she'd been mildly entertaining, flirtatious, ambitious, too interested in power and proximity to it, but he'd seen worse. Then came the invitations, the coincidental appearances at events, the increasingly obvious attempts to maneuver herself into his orbit. When charm failed, she'd become creative, then irritating, then inconvenient. Nothing dramatic at first. Rumors, manufactured encounters, petty social games designed to provoke attention. He'd ignored all of it because women like Laura typically became bored once denied the reaction they wanted. Apparently he'd underestimated how vindictive she could be. Because this was escalation. Domenico zoomed in on one of the photographs again. The lighting was poor intentionally. Bruises visible. Laura restrained in what looked like a storage room. Real enough at first glance, but appearances lied, especially with desperate people. His expression darkened further. The problem was determining whether Laura had truly orchestrated her own kidnapping, or whether someone else had taken advantage of her instability. Neither possibility pleased him. Behind him, Ginny sat curled tightly into herself, on the couch, arms wrapped around her stomach. She looked emotionally exhausted now that the adrenaline crash had finally begun settling in. "You're very quiet," she said weakly. Domenico looked over at her. There was no calculation in her face, no deceit, just fear and exhaustion and lingering panic. He believed completely now that she had walked blindly into this mess, which raised a different question entirely. Why involve Ginny and Mia at all? Laura knew exactly how these games worked. She understood leverage, fear, pressure points. So why drag her two closest friends into something this dangerous? Unless, his eyes narrowed slightly, unless they had never been the targets, just tools, disposable ones. Ginny shifted anxiously beneath his stare. That's the face people make before delivering catastrophic news. It is the face of someone thinking. That somehow feels worse. Despite the tension, the corner of his mouth almost moved again. Almost. He crossed back toward the seating area slowly, still holding her phone. Laura orchestrated this. Ginny groaned softly and covered her face with both hands. Of course she did. She contacted you directly. No, burner number. Ginny peeked through her fingers miserably. Laura disappeared 3 days ago. Then the photos started. And you believed she had been taken. She hangs around terrible people, Ginny defended weakly. This honestly didn't even make the top 5 craziest possibilities. That was concerning. Domenico sat opposite her finally, watching her carefully. Laura has approached me repeatedly over the last year. Ginny blinked. Approached how? She wished to become involved in my life. Realization dawned slowly across Ginny's face. Oh, a pause and then, oh, no. His brow lifted faintly. She's obsessed with you. She is persistent. She fake kidnapped herself because you rejected her? Ginny stared at him in disbelief. That is genuinely unhinged behavior. Yes? And somehow Mia and I got recruited into Mafia romance revenge theater. She looked personally offended now. I didn't even want to come tonight. I had anxiety diarrhea before leaving the apartment. Domenico stared at her. Ginny sighed heavily. I feel like honesty is important at this stage. For the first time since reading the messages, a low laugh escaped him unexpectedly. Short, dark, and real. Ginny pointed accusingly at him. Please don't laugh. I've suffered enough. His expression softened slightly despite himself as he studied her. Then his gaze shifted back toward the photographs again. Because underneath the absurdity remained a dangerous uncertainty. Were the photos staged? Was Laura acting alone? Or had she involved people far more dangerous than she understood? And if so, how far exactly had this situation gone? Ginny sat very still on the couch for several long seconds, staring at the photograph still glowing on her phone screen. Something about all of it felt wrong now. Not just dangerous, wrong. The panic had dulled slightly since arriving upstairs, enough for her brain to finally start catching up to the situation instead of simply screaming internally. And the more she thought about it, the less sense it made. Dom, there's something else worrying me, she said quietly. Domenico looked up immediately, liking the way she shortened his name, the way she said it. Ginny rubbed nervously at her palms. Laura could have gone a million different ways to get back at you, right? She has attempted several. But instead, she frowned deeply. She set up a blind date. His expression didn't change, but something sharpened behind his eyes. Ginny pushed forward anyway. She could have leaked rumors, embarrassed you publicly, broken into your house, and released snakes. She paused. Actually, that last one may just be what I would do. You think about weaponized reptiles often? I'm stressed, Dom. Stay focused. To her surprise, the corner of his mouth twitched faintly, but the humor vanished quickly as she continued. She specifically wanted me here, sitting with you, alone. Ginny shook her head slowly. Why? He remained silent, too silent. Ginny noticed immediately. Her stomach tightened. Wait! She sat up straighter. You know why. His jaw hardened almost imperceptibly, and suddenly cold dread slid down her spine. I don't understand, she whispered. Why would she care whether we hit it off? Still silence. Then finally Dom looked directly at her, and for the first time that evening, she saw something dangerously close to genuine alarm in his expression, not fear for himself. For her. She was not trying to embarrass me, he said quietly. Ginny blinked. She was trying to place you beside me. The room seemed to go still. What? Dom stood abruptly and crossed toward the windows again, the movement sharp with tension now. One hand dragged slowly down his jaw as pieces locked together inside his mind. Laura had always wanted proximity, attention, access, but this wasn't revenge. Not entirely. This was positioning. And suddenly every instinct he possessed turned ice cold. She knows my enemies watch me, he said darkly. She knows every woman connected to me becomes visible. Ginny's blood ran cold. No. She sends you to me publicly, ensures you are seen entering with me, leaving with me. His voice hardened further with every word. Then suddenly you matter. Ginny stared at him in horror. Oh my God! A sick feeling rolled violently through her stomach. She wasn't just revenge, she was collateral damage. Laura hadn't wanted Domenico humiliated. She'd wanted Ginny attached to him, visible beside him, a target. And the worst part? It had worked. Ginny's voice came out thin. She thought, what? That if you liked me, I'd stay? Dom turned back toward her slowly. She knows I do not involve myself casually. The implication hit hard enough to steal her breath. Laura had expected him to keep her, not for a night, not casually, because then Ginny would become valuable. Oh my God, Ginny whispered again, horrified. She pimped me out to a mafia boss. She offered you as leverage. That somehow sounds worse. It is worse. Ginny surged to her feet instantly, panic roaring back full force now. Mia! Dom was already reaching for his phone. She's alone. His expression had gone deadly calm now, which somehow frightened her more than anger would have. Call her, he ordered immediately. Tell her my man Carlo is coming to collect her. Ginny fumbled for her phone with suddenly shaking hands. Domenico's eyes locked onto hers. Tell her to pack bags for both of you. His voice dropped lower, harder. Now, Ginny's emotions were giving Domenico genuine whiplash. One moment she was panicking, the next she was furious, then hurt, then furious again, then emotionally devastated, then suddenly discussing hypothetical murder with alarming sincerity. It was honestly impressive. She paced the penthouse living room barefoot now, having kicked off her heels somewhere near the entrance during her latest breakdown. One minute she was muttering about betrayal and friendship trauma. The next she was threatening to haunt Laura spiritually after death, switching between Sicilian and English without missing a beat. She used me as mafia bait, Ginny snapped, throwing both hands in the air. Who does that? A deeply unstable woman, Dom answered calmly from the kitchen island, where he was coordinating security updates. Ginny pointed at him dramatically. And another thing, you were entirely too attractive for this plan. One of the guards standing nearby looked genuinely confused by the accusation. She sent me into a luxury death trap with a handsome mafia crime lord, Ginny continued. That's manipulative psychology. You are angry I am attractive? I'm angry it worked. Dom had almost smiled at that. Almost. But beneath the humor, tension remained razor sharp throughout the penthouse. Security had doubled downstairs. Carlo had been dispatched to retrieve Mia personally. Domenico's men were already trying to trace the burner number while another team investigated the location in the photographs. And through all of it, Ginny continued cycling through emotional states at dangerous speed. She was my friend, she said suddenly, quieter this time. That hurt more. Dom could hear it instantly beneath the anger. She lived on our couch for 6 months, Ginny muttered. Mia worked double shifts to help cover her rehab bills. Her eyes burned again. And she does this? Dom watched her carefully. Betrayal sat differently on her than fear did. Fear made her frantic. Betrayal made her vicious. The elevator doors suddenly opened, and then all hell arrived. Mia stormed into the penthouse like an enraged hurricane in sneakers. Oh, thank fuck! Ginny barely had time to stand before Mia crashed into her, grabbing her shoulders and inspecting her wildly. Are you okay? Are you bleeding? Do you have all your organs? I think so. Good. Then Mia turned and spotted Domenico. Silence. A long, horrified silence. Her eyes slowly widened. You, she pointed accusingly. You're the hot guy. Domenico blinked once. Ginny covered her face immediately. Please ignore literally everything I texted. No, Mia snapped. I specifically will not. Then her fury reignited instantly like someone had thrown gasoline on a bonfire. I am going to kill that fucking bitch, Mia exploded suddenly, pacing violently now. Do you understand what just happened to me? Carlo entered behind her, looking deeply exhausted already. Mia pointed at him dramatically. They were right there. Domenico's expression sharpened. Who? "Two massive burly assholes outside our apartment building," Mia shouted. "With knives, knives!" She looked personally offended by the concept. Who even carries knives anymore? What is this, medieval Italy? Carlo rubbed a tired hand over his face. Mia marched over and patted his arm firmly. "He saved my life, though." She nodded once, like that settled everything. "So now I'm gonna kill her." Carlo looked alarmed. "Then," Mia continued furiously, "I'm gonna go to friggin' hell and kill her all over again." Ginny stared at her. Dom's guards stared at her. Even Carlo looked unsettled. Mia pointed violently toward the ceiling like Laura was spiritually lurking somewhere above them. "Slow-like," she hissed. "I'm gonna flay the skin from her body and feed it to her." A heavy silence followed. Then Ginny nodded once. "Honestly," she said thoughtfully, "that feels emotionally valid." Dom closed his eyes briefly. His life had become completely unmanageable the second these women walked into it. 4 armed men and 1 Sicilian Mafia boss stood in stunned silence while 2 tiny women in the middle of a luxury penthouse plotted violent revenge against their former best friend. It was, Domenico reflected grimly, one of the more surreal nights of his life. Ginny and Mia had completely abandoned panic now and entered a far more dangerous emotional state, vindictive sisterhood rage, which apparently came with excessive swearing, deeply concerning threats, and alarming creativity. "She was literally living in our laundry room for 2 months, Mia ranted, pacing barefoot across the penthouse while waving one of Dom's imported sparkling waters around like a weapon. 2 months, Ginny. "I know. We pulled her out of the gutter one time." Domenico blinked slowly. "You what?" Mia spun dramatically toward him. "Actual gutter." She pointed violently. "High on speed, face down in rainwater." One of the guards muttered something in Italian that sounded very close to Holy Mother of God. Ginny was fully spiraling now, too. Because she thought it would make her run fast. She threw her hands up. "What does that even mean?" "She said she was trying to outrun sadness," Mia snapped. "She outran common sense instead." "Psycho bitch." One of Domenico's men quietly crossed himself. Another actually murmured a prayer beneath his breath. Carlo looked like he regretted surviving the knife attack earlier, because now he had to witness this. Meanwhile, Ginny had commandeered a notepad from somewhere and was aggressively sketching what appeared to be an attack plan. Domenico stared at it. Was that a flamethrower? "Mia," Ginny said suddenly, horrified anew, "she sent me on a blind date with the Mafia." "I know." "What if he'd been ugly?" Dom looked personally offended. "That would have been the final betrayal," Mia agreed seriously. "Thank you," Ginny said emotionally. "You're welcome." Dom pinched the bridge of his nose. The guards looked deeply uncomfortable. Not because of him, because of the women. "She manipulated us," Mia continued furiously, "after everything we did for her." "I can't believe you broke Mrs. Robertson's nose for that ungrateful cow," Mia added suddenly. Domenico looked up sharply. Ginny looked offended immediately. "I didn't break it." The room went silent. Ginny waved dismissively. "It was stubborn. All it did was give her 2 black eyes and split the skin." Absolute silence. One guard slowly lowered the drink he'd been holding. Carlo stared at her in open horror. Domenico felt something deeply unfamiliar rising dangerously in his chest. Laughter. Ginny turned back toward Mia thoughtfully. "Do you think I'll go to prison if I Google how to flay someone?" The horrified silence somehow deepened further. One of the men actually whispered, "Madonna." Mia considered it seriously. "Use incognito mode." "Smart." "Do not encourage this," Domenico said firmly. Both women looked at him at the exact same time. "You have people buried somewhere, don't you?" Mia accused. "I neither confirm nor deny that statement." "It feels hypocritical," Ginny informed him. "You threatened human skin removal." "She started it. She orchestrated psychological warfare. That is not a legal defense." Mia folded her arms. "Emotionally, it is." One of the guards quietly muttered another prayer. Domenico finally understood something important. These women were not dangerous in the traditional sense. No. Traditional danger was easier. These women were emotionally feral, and somehow, impossibly, he was beginning to like them. God help him. They ranted for another 2 hours. 2 full hours of rage, betrayal, exhaustion, and emotionally charged swearing that steadily lost coherence the more tired they became. At some point, the murder plotting devolved into crying, then laughing, then crying while laughing. Mia spent 15 straight minutes angrily recounting every terrible boyfriend Laura had ever dated, while Ginny occasionally interrupted with additional evidence like a hostile witness in court. She dated a guy named Spider. He spelled it with a Y. He stole copper wiring. He tried to sell my microwave. One of the guards had quietly stopped making eye contact entirely. By midnight, both women were emotionally burned out. The adrenaline finally drained from them all at once, leaving them exhausted and heavy-limbed. Ginny eventually curled up sideways on the enormous couch with a blanket wrapped around her, while Mia tucked herself against her shoulder, still muttering occasional threats. "I still hate her," Mia mumbled sleepily. "I know." "I mean it. I know. She owes me $70. That too." Within minutes they were half asleep, tangled together like emotionally devastated raccoons. Dom stood watching them silently for a moment. Something unfamiliar twisted in his chest again. Protectiveness. Dangerous thing. He motioned toward 2 guards nearby. "Stay with them." Both men nodded immediately, but looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "And if they attempt revenge?" The older guard looked deeply serious. "Which one?" Dom considered that. "Fair point." Then he turned and headed toward the security room where the real investigation was already underway. The atmosphere changed instantly the second he stepped inside. Cold, focused, efficient. Screens covered the walls displaying camera feeds, maps, phone records, timestamps, security logs. Men moved quickly between computers while Carlos stood near the center of the room, reviewing information. And in the corner sat a woman shaking violently in a chair. Mascara streaked black lines down her face. Her hands remained clasped tightly in her lap, while one of Domenico's men stood nearby watching her carefully. The Amara floor manager. She looked up the second Domenico entered. "I didn't know," she blurted immediately. "I swear to God I didn't know." Domenico said nothing. Tears spilled down her face, harder. "She said you weren't attending tonight. She said you had a date planned already." Her voice cracked. "She just asked me to add Ginny Ferrante as a favor." "What favor?" "She said it was romantic," the woman cried. "That they were reconnecting after years apart and she wanted to surprise her friend." She shook her head frantically. "I didn't know she was lying." "Where is Laura?" "I don't know." The fear in her face looked genuine. Domenico studied her another moment before dismissing her from his attention entirely. If she was involved, it was peripherally, stupid rather than malicious. "Boss?" Carlo interrupted quietly. Domenico crossed toward the monitors. It didn't take long. One screen displayed the photographs Laura had sent Ginny. Another showed extracted metadata. Location services, still active. Domenico stared at the coordinates in silence. Not bright, not even remotely bright. Whoever helped Laura stage this had been careless or arrogant. "Warehouse District," Carlo muttered. "North Side." Domenico's expression darkened instantly. Move. The warehouse turned out to be exactly what he expected. Cheap, temporary, poorly planned. Laura sat tied to a chair beneath harsh, fluorescent lights. When his men dragged the doors open, she looked terrified for approximately 3 seconds before realizing who stood in front of her. Then her expression changed. Not relief. She was annoyed. Domenico noticed immediately. The bruises washed too evenly across her cheekbones. The swelling inconsistent. Makeup, not injury. A stage. But for whom? Him, Ginny, or both? His jaw hardened. One of the men cut the restraints while another searched the room. 2 bodies already lay cooling near the rear exit, taken out by Carlo. One belonged to a young man Domenico recognized instantly. Vitali. Interesting. Laura rubbed her wrists dramatically before noticing Domenico wasn't reacting, at least not in the way she had wanted him to. What? She snapped. You used cosmetics incorrectly, he said flatly, though I'm not at all surprised. Her expression flickered. Why? Domenico asked the word cold, hard. Hatred poured out of her instantly, ugly and raw. She spat suddenly. Those pathetic little girls worshipped me for years, and the second I started struggling, they looked at me differently. Domenico said nothing. Perfect Ginny and Mia, Laura sneered. Their perfect friendship, their perfect little sisterhood. Her lip curled. I was never really part of it. So that was it? Jealousy, resentment, addiction rotting what little sanity remained. They loved you, Carlo said coldly. They pitied me. No, Domenico said quietly. They saved you, time and again. More times than you deserved. Laura laughed bitterly. Well, now they know what it feels like to be scared. Domenico's eyes moved toward the dead young man again. And him? A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. He helped me. Vitali's son. That finally made her go pale. Real understanding dawned slowly in her eyes. He knew what she had done then. Aligning herself with the enemy. Domenico looked down at her calmly. You used the son of a rival family to feed your habit, he said evenly, and to take revenge on a Don because he rejected you. Laura stopped breathing. No, and worst of all, Domenico continued coldly, you did it as an outsider, a junkie, a bug who stepped on a prince. Terror finally arrived then. Real terror, because she understood exactly what that meant. Domenico looked toward Carlo. Deliver her to Don Vitali, he ordered calmly. Laura immediately began shaking her head violently. No, no, please. Let him know this junkie used his son to manipulate a Don. Her panic exploded instantly. No, Domenico, please. And tell him, Domenico finished quietly, she is responsible for his son's death tonight. Carlo nodded once. Neither man needed to say aloud what happened next, because knowing Don Vitali, Laura would not survive long enough to speak Domenico's name again. He didn't watch Laura being dragged away, or Vitali's son being removed from the warehouse to be respectfully returned to his father. Whatever relation came his way from these events, he would deal with it. If Vitali was wise, which he usually was, Laura would be the end of it. If not, he'd be waiting. His thoughts turned to the penthouse, on the 2 tiny women who didn't know he'd just condemned their friend to a death sentence. It was nearly 11 the next morning before the tiny warrior women finally woke. The penthouse had gone quiet hours earlier. Security rotations changed silently in the halls, while the city outside carried on beneath the towering glass windows, completely unaware that emotional warfare, mafia politics, and deeply concerning skin removal discussions had occurred overnight. Domenico had slept for exactly 3 hours, long enough to shower, long enough to change into a fresh black shirt and tailored trousers. long enough to eat something resembling breakfast while reviewing updates from his men. Now he sat in the living area with an espresso in one hand, waiting for the inevitable storm that would follow once Ginny and Mia regained consciousness fully. Because these women felt everything intensely. Anger, fear, love, loyalty, all of it burned through them too brightly. And despite everything Laura had done, Domenico knew grief was coming next. He had seen enough of human nature to recognize it already. Betrayal did not erase love overnight. Not real love. Laura had been their friend long before addiction and bitterness hollowed her out from the inside, before jealousy poisoned every relationship she touched, before resentment twisted into cruelty. Ginny would mourn the version of Laura she remembered, the girl before all this, and Mia would too, though she would probably swear through the entire grieving process aggressively. The couch shifted suddenly. Domenico looked up just as Ginny blinked awake, beneath the blanket cocoon she'd created overnight. Her hair had escaped entirely from its careful styling and now framed her face in soft chaos. For several seconds she looked genuinely peaceful. Then memory hit. "Oh no," she whispered. Beside her, Mia groaned awake instantly. "If this is another emotional crisis before coffee, I'm declaring war." Ginny sat upright too quickly and winced. "I drank expensive Mafia whiskey." "You drank it like a divorced father at Christmas. That feels targeted." Mia squinted toward Dom, then froze. "Oh." She pointed sleepily. "You're still here." Domenico lifted a brow. "Were you expecting me to vanish mysteriously into the night?" "A little." "That's vampires." "Close enough." Despite himself, amusement tugged briefly at the corner of his mouth again. Ginny noticed instantly and stared. Dom was beginning to understand something unfortunate about himself. He liked when she looked at him like that. Too much. Ginny pushed the blanket aside slowly, nerves visibly returning now that consciousness had fully settled in. "You found her." Not a question. Dom set down his espresso. "Yes." The room quieted immediately. Mia sat up straighter. Ginny's hands tightened together in her lap automatically, like she was bracing for impact. Domenico studied them both carefully before speaking. "She staged the photographs using makeup," he said evenly. "The kidnapping was false." Relief flashed first, sharp and immediate, then confusion, then something sadder. "She really did all this?" Ginny asked quietly. "Yes." Mia looked furious instantly. "I'm still gonna belt the shit out of her." But her voice cracked slightly at the edges. There it was. Grief arriving quietly beneath the rage. Domenico leaned back slightly, watching the emotional shift happen in real time. Neither woman spoke for several seconds. Ginny looked devastated now in a softer, quieter way than last night. "She used to sleep in my bed after nightmares," she whispered absently, "when we were teenagers." Her eyes burned suddenly. She used to cry if thunderstorms got too loud. Domenico said nothing. "She wasn't always—" Ginny gestured helplessly. "No," he agreed quietly. "She wasn't." Mia rubbed aggressively at her eyes. "I hate addiction." "So do I." Silence settled heavily again. Then eventually Ginny looked back up at him, wary now. "What happened to her?" Domenico held her gaze steadily. "I delivered her to Don Vitali." Both women froze. Mia blinked once. "That sounds ominous." "It is." Ginny went pale instantly. "Dom—" "She involved his son," he said calmly. "A son now dead because of her actions." His voice remained level, controlled. "Her choices placed her into his hands, not mine." Neither woman spoke. They understood. Maybe not the details, but enough. Mia looked away first, jaw tight with conflicting emotions. Ginny simply stared down at her hands. And Dom realized then that no matter what Laura had become, these women would carry the weight of losing her anyway, which only strengthened something already solidifying inside him. Protectiveness, possession, certainty. He watched Ginny carefully as she sat there grieving a friendship that had betrayed her completely. Mine. The thought arrived with terrifying ease. Absolute, unshakable. Domenico had never been a man who hesitated once his mind settled on something, and his mind had settled fully now. Ginevra Ferrante was his. He would allow her softness, patience, the illusion of freedom if she required it. He would court her properly because Ginny deserved honesty, care, and dignity. But the outcome itself? Non-negotiable. She would belong beside him, eventually. No arguments, though judging by the stubborn spark already returning to her exhausted face, there would absolutely be arguments. Mia watched Domenico quietly from across the bench while Ginny disappeared briefly into the bathroom to wash her face. The exhaustion lingering in the room felt heavy now that the chaos had settled. Morning sunlight spilled through the towering windows, catching against marble floors and untouched coffee cups, while grief sat quietly between them all. Her heart hurt. It hurt for Laura, for the girl she used to be before drugs, jealousy, and self-destruction hollowed her out piece by piece. Mia hated that despite everything, some stubborn part of her still remembered sleepovers, shared clothes, late-night crying sessions, and the way Laura used to laugh so hard she snorted. Losing someone while they were still technically alive felt cruel in a completely different way, but at the same time, her chest felt full too, because Ginny was safe, actually safe, and somehow, against every possible odd, this terrifying Sicilian Mafia boss had spent the entire night protecting them instead of becoming another thing to fear. Mia studied him carefully now, while he pretended to focus on his espresso. She caught the way his attention drifted instinctively toward the bathroom door every few seconds, the subtle tension in his posture whenever Ginny was out of sight too long, the quiet patience underneath all that dangerous control. Then there was the look. That look. Every woman knew it when she saw it. Possessive, protective, devoted in a way men rarely admitted aloud. And the truly shocking part? Ginny didn't seem to realize yet just how completely doomed she was. Mia's lips curved into a small, sad smile. Oh yeah, this one was staying. Dom noticed her watching eventually and lifted one dark brow slightly. You have something to say? Mia snorted softly. Oh, I have many things to say. She leaned back against the couch, arms folding loosely. But mostly I'm deciding whether I need to threaten you. To his credit, he looked almost amused. And your conclusion? Mia glanced toward the bathroom door where Ginny was humming faintly to herself, completely unaware of the emotional intervention forming in the living room. Then Mia looked back at him carefully. My conclusion, she said quietly, is that you looked at my best friend like she mattered before you even knew what was happening. Her smile softened further. And after the years she's had. She shook her head once. I'm definitely making sure she keeps you.